So now I'm really pleased to give the floor to Joe Traynor, and I think it's probably fair to say that Joe is a veteran statistician at the Office for National Statistics. So he's been working over the last 20 years on the main surveys produced by the ONS, so the LFS, the General Household Survey, and now the Crime Survey for England and Wales. So he has been, therefore, responsible for a large amount of the official statistics produced by the ONS. And now, currently, within the Crime Survey for England and Wales, he is in charge of the switch from traditional single questionnaire survey mode to multimodal mode of administration. So I'm just going to... That's the one here, and this. So please use this.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about the transformation of the Crime Survey for England and Wales. There's two main parts to the development that I want to talk about. One is the multimodal development of the survey, so it can be conducted face-to-face, online, via the telephone, and so on. And then the experimentation we've been doing to move to a panel design. I did give this presentation about a year ago. I was hoping that we would have produced some results by now and published the results and been able to show you all the estimates that come through from the panel design. There's been a couple of issues with it, which I'm going to talk about and talk you through today. But let's just talk a little bit about the multimodal survey development, which I think has gone well. Well, why are we doing a multimodal survey, or trying to move the survey instrument to be able to operate multimodally? Well, I think if you look at all surveys, particularly large government surveys, they've all suffered post-pandemic from a reduction in response rates and also an increase in costs and so on. So, you know, a move to a survey which is capable of operating via the telephone and online may well in the future reduce costs and increase benefits. So there's some ideas there about increase inclusivity, with a greater reach, moving online and so on, hopefully improve response rates, and potentially, although we're by no certain moving to it, you know, moving more to an online first approach potentially in the future. And then I suppose the last point, which is quite important, which is to actually update the survey instrument. The survey instrument has operated in pretty much the same fashion for those main estimates of crime all the way since the very origins in the early 80s. It's with some trepidation that we do that because, of course, there's a discontinuity in the time series that comes out about it, and we know that we need to handle that. In fact, in our last consultation with users, when we were talking about this transformation program, that was one of the key things that users were saying, that we need to be very sensitive about handling that and how we do that going forward. So where have we got to? Well, the multimodal development, we've been experimenting with those initial screener questions that the survey operates. So they're the questions that we ask people whether they've been subject to something that might amount to a crime, so whether they've been hit, whether the car's been stolen, and so on. And then they screen people into victim forms, so that they're called screeners. It's probably the most complex part of the survey instrument. When we've experimented with this in the past, what we found is that for the majority of people who are victims to just one single crime, the survey operates very well. But it's when people become victims of multiple crimes is that the issues begin to occur. So people can fall subject to multiple crimes of the same type or different types. They can occur at the same time or at different times. And within the current face-to-face survey instrument, there's a lot of interaction between the interviewer and the respondent about how to negotiate that and how to work out how many victim forms that we need to open in order to ascertain what the person's fallen victim to. So doing that in a self-completion mode is very, very complex. And then, of course, it's important to get it right. The most vulnerable in society fall prey to the most crime and suffer repeat multiple victimisations, as the presentation so clearly demonstrated this morning. Successes to date, well, we believe we've found a solution. We've got a set of prototype screener questions now. We're very cautious about it, and it needs a lot more testing. But we have developed a set of prototype questions, all designed with the help of questionnaire development methodologists in the ONS. And actually, there's a report being published in relation to that on the 31st of this month, talking about the progress made to date and then what the potential next steps may be in relation to that. So I think that's been pretty successful. I will mention the NCVS, the American survey. They've been developing their survey for multimodal use as well. And they believe that they've developed an instrument broadly along the same lines as our development. They have this, if you read their research program, they had this interleaving and non-interleaving approach, which they tested 2 different types of survey instruments. And I think actually we've come to very similar conclusions. Not completely the same, and it's not completely the same survey instrument in America, of course, but we seem to be coming together somewhat in our programs of research. So yeah, very promising for the future, I think, really. And then moving on to the panel design. So what is the panel design? Well, we thought we'd experiment with going back and re-interviewing respondents 12 months later. Why were we doing this? Well, it would increase the sample size. And I think also we experimented it within the pandemic. In the pandemic, of course, all interviewing in people's homes stopped. So what we did was we took those people who'd responded to the survey in the previous 2 years and had agreed to be recontacted, and we phoned them up and conducted telephone interviews with them and developed estimates from that at that point in time. So post-pandemic, we thought, well, it seemed to work within the pandemic, maybe it will work going forward. Also, post-pandemic, of course, response rates have fallen and costs have increased. And of course, increasing the sample size, one of the ways that we thought we might be able to achieve it is by going back to the same people. The biggest part of a cost of a survey is, of course, gaining a respondent in the first place, going around to people's houses, knocking on the doors, asking them to take part, trying to persuade them to take part. Once you've captured them, it seems a bit, you know, the idea that you just then say thank you very much and just leave and go away, the potential to actually re-interview that person 12 months later has obvious benefits, really, in relation to it. And then, of course, the potential for longitudinal analysis, which I suppose a lot of people would be very interested in. It's not something that's been done in this country before. The NCVS also operates on a panel design slightly differently. They interview everybody in the household. We interview only one person. But yeah, they operate a panel design. But it's not something that's been done here before. So the plan was to move to the design as fast as possible. So the first interviews to be conducted in the traditional manner, with follow-up interviews annually conducted over the phone. Some of the successes, well, the return to face-to-face interviewing was in October 2021, post-pandemic. So, I mean, we were one of the first surveys to actually manage to get back into the field and interviewing. That means that in October 2022, potentially we could start the first wave of second interviews. That first 6 months data wasn't particularly great. The level of response rate when we first went back wasn't particularly fantastic. So we kind of dismissed the first 6 months of data. So really the first annual data set we've had was March 2024 on wave 1 and wave 2 data. Well, how successful has it been? Well, agreement to recontact between the waves 1 and 2 was 60%. So of those who were interviewed at wave 1 the first time, 60% agreed to be re-interviewed. And then the response rate at wave 2 was 41% of those eligible households. So overall, 27% of respondents at wave 1 responded at wave 2, producing a data set of just over 8,000 interviews. So what were the results? Well, when the data was analysed, differences between the estimates of crime existed between wave 1 and wave 2. And wave 2 estimates were found to be higher than those at wave 1. I was slightly surprised by this, really. The NCVS in America, they operate a panel design, as I said, their estimates are always lower at wave 2. They conduct their first interviews face-to-face, and then the subsequent interviews are conducted via the telephone. So very much the same approach, the same difference in modes between waves. So we were expecting the differences to be lower, but we found out that they were higher. The initial plan was to publish those estimates in the autumn of 2024 when we'd done the analysis. However, we've delayed that as we wanted to be sure about the estimates, that the estimates were correct, and that we fully understood the reasons for those differences between the estimates. Well, what could explain the difference between the estimates? Well, of course, I've just said that it was 27% of respondents took part between the waves. So there's plenty of scope for bias in the attrition between those two waves to explain it. So, you know, whether was the sample composition different between wave 1 and wave 2? The weighting that we devised to try and compensate for some of the bias, propensity score weighting, where we tried to model the wave 2 responses back to wave 1 victimization, if you want, in terms of characteristics. Was that appropriate, and did that work? And then, of course, different attrition of victims and non-victims are different, so did more victims of crime take part at wave 1 and move on to complete wave 2 interviews? So there's plenty of reasons why there may be bias in those results and what's underlying that. And then, of course, modal effects, the difference between a face-to-face interview and a telephone interview. Does that address, and you know, is that the cause of any of those issues? And then panel design effects as well. So is there something about being interviewed for a second time that would explain people to increase the reporting of victimization at wave 2, and what could sit behind that? And there's plenty of theories around about that, really. I mean, certainly respondents know what they're getting at wave 2, and they know what questions we're going to ask. You know, so you could see how that might potentially increase people's reporting at wave 2. I find that very interesting, really, myself, because if you think, I mean, fraud's a typical example, you know, probably we all fall victims to, or nearly victims to, some fraud. You know, we always get those scam emails, and whether we responded to it, whether we dismiss them and forget about certain times where we nearly got caught, and therefore don't report it. But if you've been participating in the crime survey, know you're going to be asked the following year, do you make a mental note of it, or remember that for next time? Or if some minor incident, somebody pushes you around someplace, you might have forgotten about normally on a Wave 1 interview, do you remember it at a Wave 2 interview? The interesting thing about that is I'm not too worried by it. Sometimes I think, well, maybe the estimate's actually more accurate at Wave 2. For there to be more victims at Wave 2, you know, would a respondent lie? No, but they probably would remember more incidents. So does that make it more accurate? I don't know. It's an interesting question that I ponder over quite a lot. So anyway, we looked at the results. We also had an independent review by Southampton University looking at the data and looking at the work that we did. It was a bit like somebody marking your homework. Yeah, I mean, they said that we'd covered the most likely explanations of the differences, that we hadn't identified any, you know, particular cause for the differences, though there are some small components of an explanation within that, but not enough to describe what was going on, and that they were in favour of us continuing the data collection and the continued panel design. So acting on the conclusions, we've continued the data collection through 24-25. That means we've got a 2-year data set now. So we've got 2 years of Wave 2 data that we can combine together. We've actually got a year of Wave 3 data as well. So we're going to combine all those estimates together and actually have a much larger data set then where we can actually explore these differences. And also over a longer period of time and try and explain what the differences are, you know, whether those differences that we saw in the initial year, whether they continue through to the second year and so on. We will be producing results later in the year. We will be publishing. We'll look at the differences. We'll be showing those differences in the characteristics, differences in the estimates between waves. We'll discuss the weighting methodologies we've applied, and what we feel might be an explanation for those differences. I think also, given the nature of the work undertaken and given the scale of the differences between the waves, we're also looking at doing different ways of sampling in addition to a panel design or as an alternative to the panel design. So we may give consideration to an address-based online sampling where we supplement the face-to-face with an online. We wouldn't consider actually changing from one to the other, but maybe supplementing the sample design, the face-to-face with an online additional sample. We'll give consideration to that, but we haven't drawn any conclusions really at the moment. I think I'll leave it there.
Thank you again.